Tavarius stood there, his chest heaving, his face a distorted mask of entitlement and fear. "You have no right," he bellowed, his voice cracking. "This is my house. My condo. I'm the master here, and he pointed a shaking, grease-stained finger at me. "She's just a guest in my world now." I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I just looked at him with the same clinical detachment I used when looking at a tumor that needed to be excised. Governor Cassius Thorne didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The air in the room seemed to solidify around him, growing cold and heavy. He reached into the inner pocket of his charcoal jacket and pulled out a slim, blue folder. He didn't hand it to Tavarius. He placed it on the table, right next to the plate of roast duck that my son-in-law had been devouring so animalistically moments before. "Actually, Tavarius," the governor said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, "you aren't the master of anything. Not anymore." He flipped the folder open. "This is an emergency protective order signed by a Superior Court judge exactly 2 hours ago. It mandates your immediate removal from these premises. But that's just the appetizer." Tavarius reached for the folder, but the major, the head of security, stepped forward, his hand resting meaningfully on his holster. Tavarius pulled his hand back, as if he'd been burned. "I told you I was a God-fearing man," Cassius continued, leaning forward until he was inches from Tavarius's sweating face. "But I'm also a man of the law. You see, Ms. Oilia didn't just call me because we're old friends. She called me because she is a woman of foresight. She knew that a man like you, a petty thief with a title, would eventually try to steal the very roof over her head." I spoke up then, my voice steady despite the throb in my arm. "I didn't spend 40 years saving lives and building a legacy to have it gambled away by a man who can't even look his mother-in-law in the eye while he starves her." Javisha let out a strangled sob. "Mama, please. You're destroying everything. We were going to take care of you." "Take care of me?" I turned my gaze to her. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, looking at the child I carried and seeing a stranger. "You watched him break my arm, Javisha. You watched him pull the phones out of the wall. You sat at this table and ate while I sat here with an empty plate. You didn't take care of me. You conspired in my ending. But you forgot, I am a surgeon. I know when a limb is beyond saving. I know when it's time to amputate." The governor nodded to the major. "Read him the rest." The major stepped forward, his voice robotic and chilling. "Tavarius Miller, as of 8:05 p.m., your personal and professional bank accounts have been frozen pending a state investigation into the misappropriation of city housing funds. We have testimony from 3 of your subordinates." He glanced at the guests, who looked like they wanted to crawl under the rug, "regarding the kickbacks you took on the 4th Street development project." Tavarius collapsed back into his chair, the chair that belonged to my late husband. His bravado vanished, replaced by a gray, sickly pallor. You can't. I have friends." "Your friends are currently being questioned by the FBI," Cassius said, standing up to his full, imposing height. "And as for this condo? You never owned it. Ms. Oilia placed this property into a blind trust years ago. The deed you were trying to force her to sign was a decoy. She knew you'd come for it. She just needed you to show your hand." The governor turned to the 2 tactical officers at the door. "Gentlemen, escort Mr. Miller out. He has an appointment with the holding cell. And since he likes lessons so much, let's ensure he learns the one about aggravated domestic assault and elder abuse." The room erupted into motion. The officers moved with surgical efficiency. They didn't grab Tavarius roughly. They simply applied enough pressure to his pressure points that he stood up like a puppet on strings. The petty king was reduced to a whimpering man in a charcoal suit, his heels dragging on the hardwood floor as he was led out of the dining room. Javisha stood up, her beige dress trembling. "What about me?" "Mama, I'm your daughter." I looked at the blue hydrangeas Cassius had brought me. They were beautiful, vibrant, and full of life. "The protective order covers the entire household, Javisha. Cassius has arranged for a car to take you to a hotel. Your things will be packed and sent to you tomorrow. After that, I suggest you find a way to live on your own merit. I am no longer your charity, and you are no longer my daughter." The silence that followed was absolute. Javisha looked at the governor, then back at me, realizing there was no mercy left in the room. She turned and walked out, her head down, following the trail of her husband's disgrace. The guests, Marcus and the others, stood up awkwardly. "Ms. Oilia, we didn't know," Marcus whispered, his face full of genuine shame. "You knew enough to see an old woman with a broken arm and an empty plate," I said quietly.
"Leave. Now."
They fled. Finally, the room was empty of the noise and the filth. Only Cassius and I remained, along with the steady tick-tock of my father's clock. Cassius sat back down in the chair next to mine. He picked up the fork again, his hand steady, and speared a small piece of apple from the duck platter. "You always were the toughest person I ever knew, Doc," he said, his voice finally losing its steel and returning to the warmth of the young soldier I had saved so long ago. "I had a good teacher, Cassius," I whispered, feeling the first real tear prick my eye, not of pain, but of relief. "The world is a hard place. You have to be harder." "Eat," he said gently, bringing the food to my lips. "You've had a long day, and you have a lot of living left to do in this house." I swallowed the food, the taste of victory and apples sweet on my tongue. The doorbell had rung 10 minutes ago, and in those 10 minutes, the hierarchy of my world had been restored. The predators were gone. The lioness was no longer cornered. I was Oilia, a surgeon, a survivor, and finally, once again, the master of my own home. What would you like to do next? Would you like me to write an epilogue about how Oilia regains her strength and helps the governor take down the rest of the corrupt city officials? Or should we start a new story with a similar theme of hidden power?